Good morning, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm very good. Nice to see you this morning.
Yes, you too. Today we're joined by Jonathan Cox for this episode. Really excited to hear a lot about the work that Jonathan's doing. He's a man of many countries, we'll say. And I share some of that interest as well. So yeah, I'll start off, I think, by just opening it up to Jonathan and let him introduce himself, what he does with his work at the RooLife Group. Jonathan, take it away. What's your role as the China CEO? Can you explain a little bit
Yeah,
more about
well,
what exactly
recently
that
changed.
means?
Yes, thank you. So recently changed Asia CEO since we're expanding our reach into the greater Asian market. Just a simple introduction to myself. I was born in the UK, but I'm from the US, from Florida. I've been in Australia now for 12 years, but I grew up in Asia Pacific. My parents moved to Hong Kong when I was 5 years old, and I think that's where it got instilled in me the love for Asia and also seeing the opportunity for Asia. I saw this graph recently, actually, where they had drawn a circle around like China and Southeast Asia and India. And I don't know all the facts around this, but it said that like 50% of the world's population lives within this circle. And it's also some of the world's biggest growing markets. And as a young man growing up in my late teens, I was looking for my vocation, my career. And I went back to those early experiences and also what I was seeing at that time on the growth of China and the growth of Southeast Asia. So I went to China in my early 20s and I studied Mandarin at Qingdao University. And I still have the notebook that I wrote down why I was going. It was to learn Mandarin, to communicate with China and Chinese and learn Mandarin for the purpose of bringing in Western brands and services to that fast growing market. And that to this day, 25, 30 years later, that is still my passion and that's what excites me. So what we do in RooLife Group is we're a multicultural uh, brand distribution and sales and marketing company. So we're a one-stop solution to bring your FMCG, fast-moving consumer good products. So that's basically anything you can find in Kohl's or Woolies
Hmm.
or Chemist Warehouse, a packaged product, and we help you launch it into markets in Asia, particularly the world's biggest markets being China, India, and we also do work with the US.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a quite an inspiring story. It makes me actually reflect on something I went through when I was younger. So
And what was
I don't know. It
that?
depends. It depends on where you live, right, in the U.S. But I'm also American by birth. I grew up in California, so on the other side of the country from where you are at. And
Yes,
I think
yeah.
growing up, it depends on who you're with and what school you end up with and what circle of people that kind of influence your life. But I remember that I always had this fascination with that part of the world, having taken an international marketing course, I think in high school, and then move on to college. You end up having a very similar kind of course, and just by chance going to a university in Southern California, I went to Pepperdine University. There was a lot of international students at the time there. And from that experience, I ended up connecting with other people, and some of them ended up moving from the UK to Hong Kong. And then I had this fascination with the region. I was like, exactly what you were talking about was saying, there's a lot of stuff going on over there. Things, it just seems so exotic, so, different than where we were living. And I think if you ask a lot of Americans, some of them don't even have passports, right? So, like,
Yeah.
it was a very unusual thing to have this kind of interest. And I think it
Yes.
was coming back from my background where my parents came from South America. So I was first generation US. So I always had this kind of desire or kind of feeling to go explore what's out there, right? And what's different. And so I did kind of have my stint where I went and learned a bit of Mandarin and tried to find
So
ways to go out there.
you speak Spanish then?
No, well, high school Spanish in the U.S. I think is about as far as I got.
Yeah, yeah.
I speak a little bit of Thai to get by because my partner's Thai. I lived in Thailand for 8 years, not too
Wow,
far before I moved to Australia.
fascinating.
But yeah, many years ago, the goal was to, excuse me, go out to China. Actually, did a little bit of a joint venture exploration back in the 90s, before probably all the development happened. But yeah, it was just a fascinating thing, and I always found ways to go visit friends in Hong Kong and take trips into the mainland, and I got as far as Thailand, and that's kind of where I settled for a long time. But yeah,
Well, that's a
it's
cool
quite interesting
thing.
to find other people that are have that passion for kind of exploring other parts of the world. And to your point, there's a rising middle class, right, in that entire region, that circle you talked about, and
Yeah.
there's so much opportunity I feel in this part of the world that as people are developing countries and things are jumping beyond the first generation technology, they're going right into like the latest. There's no They're not worried about landline phones. They're worried like directly to the digital, right? It's just
Yes,
everything is digital, and I think
absolutely.
you're in the right opportunity, and we're in the right region to see where this goes.
It certainly is exciting. Yeah, just to go back actually into why I went to learn Mandarin, you reminded me of something. And when I was 14, I had read somewhere that if you can speak English and Spanish and Mandarin, that you can communicate with almost 50% of the planet.
I think I read that same book or article. I do remember
And
that.
I
Yeah.
speak some bad, Florida Spanish, and I did live in Mexico for a couple years. And so I spoke broken Spanish and English. And so I'm like, well, if I could put Mandarin, I can communicate with 50% of the planet. So that's one of my key motivations as well in going to learn Mandarin. And I would just say that this does lead to business and commerce. But I think the thing I learned most from learning Mandarin was having an understanding of the culture. That's what language gives you in a deeper way. Because you can communicate and have a translator, and now there's even AI and apps to do that.
Right.
So you can translate the words or
But it's
documents
nuance.
so fast today. But what you get from learning the languages, you learn about the people and the culture. And essentially what I love to do, and that's what we're doing today, is communicate. Humans communicating with one another. And language is a way to do that. So that was just explaining part of my journey to where we are
So
today.
I've read it, and we did talk a bit before. You do have a corporate background where you worked in a very large organization called Tupperware, and I
Yes,
understand.
correct.
I heard you were actually in another interview mentioning how as a younger man you were looking for opportunities. So it says it doesn't matter what the opportunity is as long as it gives me an opportunity to move and work with that part of the world. So I
Exactly.
think it's quite interesting that you kind of had a plan from the beginning. Was it because you were interested in the culture, or because you said, I always knew I wanted to do business in this part of the world?
I I I don't know what it is, but China, in particular, of any country in the world, just gets me excited. And, when I'm going to be flying to China on Monday, today's Friday, and I've lived there for 10 years, and I've been there literally hundreds of times. But every time I go, it's just such a world of opportunity, and
Hmm.
you never know what's going to happen. Things can go very good. They can also go very bad. I don't gamble, but maybe I do because I do business in China. Um, we had a just to give a case in point, we had a kickoff of a promotion for a product which we carry in China, and we had to. And so yesterday was the first day of the beginning of the 11/11 promotions online for us, and we had to move a considerable amount of inventory into China to get ready for that promotion. But you never know how the promotion is going to go until it actually hits. And yesterday it kicked off at 9 o'clock, and it went very well. But I'm telling you, the couple weeks before, just thinking about how will the promotion go today, and then when it hits, it's just so exciting. But you just never know with China.
Yeah. So, RooLife Group, you obviously have a lot of personal experience living in the region, working there, and you bring a unique perspective on things with for companies that are trying to move into that region. I noticed you had some big brands like Remedy moving in there as well, and you've helped them.
Yes,
And
yes.
also, Reed Cherries, I saw was another one from Australia. What
Correct.
are the target ideal customers if people are looking at RooLife Group and they're saying, okay, do we are we big enough for them to help us? Like, who do you specifically target? Is it mostly enterprise size companies, or
Yeah.
what's your ideal customer?
To be honest, most of our clients now are inbound leads and referrals. But you've hit on an extremely important point is what kind of brands would we target, or what are the brands that will align and ultimately can be successful in other markets?
Because we
Now,
know there's a lot of investment in times. I remember thinking back when we were looking at the joint venture in China, this is in the 90s, you're saying there's an investment, there's a long time play. This is not a go in and make quick money play. This is you have to kind of embed yourself locally and figure things out and then build upon that over time, with relationships being more important than maybe other countries might be a bit more transactional. Is that what
yeah.
you find as being the case for companies moving in?
Absolutely. It takes time. It takes time and it takes money and it takes resources. Now, like with everything, there are cases where things have gone viral, particularly out of Australia and New Zealand, and you have those anomalies where products have gone viral through the Daigou channels, which is the group selling channels in China, and the gray market. But generally speaking, 99.99% of the time, it's exactly what you described: is you've got to have a strategy and you've got to have a plan and investment. Back to the question which you presented about what are the target companies,
Target.
or what are the appropriate companies to go into any other market. I would say probably from my experience, this is my experience and my opinion, is you have to have brands that already have a good deal of traction in their local market and that have scaled, and that usually those two things, scaling and traction, are also a function of time. It usually means you've been around a while. So generally speaking, it's not right for startups. There's always exception to every rule. It's better for companies that are established and have a successfully proven track record in their own market. Over that journey of, say, from 0 to 10 million or 50 million or $100 million, they have learned a lot and ironed out a lot of kinks. First of all, they've got a value
Mm-hmm.
proposition that works for consumers and people
Mm-hmm.
buy it. They've gotten their supply chain sorted. They've got marketing and support material already created. They've got a team that has supported that volume of growth. So that team can then help you accelerate and in your support for a new market, etc. So a lot of things come with um, time and scaling and the size of your business that gets you ready to export. Going on the reverse of that question is, generally speaking, going overseas or going global is not a life preserver if your business is not doing well. It's not going to save you. And we do get people coming in like that. So we're struggling in Australia, we're struggling in the US. So we really believe that the opportunity is there for us overseas. It well may be, but you might not be big enough or strong enough or experienced enough to face the challenges that a new market like that would
I
present.
think that's a really valid point. I think looking at a company that maybe is struggling and trying to say, it's almost like you're married and you say, well, we'll have a kid, it'll fix the marriage. Maybe
Uh,
that's a similar kind of
Good
thing, right?
analogy.
Right.
Exactly.
I think you have to kind of
Exactly.
figure out what the core thing is, because if you add geographies, you're adding complexity. You're now adding different
Yes.
cultures, you're adding different regulations, you're adding just the distance from the corporate HQ. So, do you find that the companies you're working with are looking for partnerships that go into China and they establish a joint venture, or do they typically go in and they get local teams and they build up their own infrastructure? What's the balance, I guess, there?
I'd say that again goes back to the question of the scale of the company. If we look historically, particularly at China, you've seen a lot of big companies from the US, Germany, UK, and big companies like from Germany, Bayer and Henkel, and of course,
Mm.
U.S. There's multiple examples going back to Starbucks, McDonald's, the Hilton hotel franchises, Ford, et cetera, et cetera. These companies, the big ones, saw the opportunity in China 30, 40 years ago, established joint ventures, went in
Yeah.
big, went in a big way, big investment in plants, land, infrastructure, offices, etc., and partnered. At that time, it was required that you had to partner and do a joint venture with Chinese entities. Um, so right now, I'm based in Australia, and Australia, by the geographical size of this market, and New Zealand as well, it's like if it's only being sold in Australia or New Zealand, the brand or product, it's like the goldfish bowl is only this big, and it can only
Yes.
get this big because of the population. So for brands that in Australia and New Zealand that have not exported yet, by and large, on a truly global scale, they're really small to medium sized enterprises.
Hmm.
And for them, they might not have the scale to go in that big way, which we talked about, and they need an agent or a distributor to help them enter the market. And that's where we come in. And quite frankly, before you say drop hundreds of thousands of dollars it would take to set up an office, put your woofie, they call it wholly owned foreign enterprise in China, in somewhere like Shanghai, Guangzhou, or Beijing, and hire a staff, et cetera. I mean, you're quickly looking at, six, seven figures a year before you've done anything. And before you have the experience, it might be better for you to work with a partner like ourselves. And there's many choices. There's many good reputable companies that can kind of take your hand and take you through that journey as you learn about your product, your value chain, the market, which channels work for you, et cetera, before you go fully in there and lock, stock, and barrel and set up an enterprise in China. So it
So,
depends on your scale, vision, and appetite for risk.
so we know that there's a lot of logistical and legal and regulatory things you have to set up. But what about maybe there's an executive in this part of the world in Australia wants to build business in China, but knows very little, hasn't spent a lot of time there, like yourself, has doesn't understand the culture. Do you also offer those kind of things to kind of educate or to kind of prepare them for that shift?
Absolutely. And the first thing you actually need to do with thinking about entering an overseas market is understand the regulatory environment for your product. That's almost number one. And it's not the exciting stuff. It's not the bells and whistles. It's not the marketing. It's not the huge channels and the 1.5 billion customers
The
first. That's
creative branding and all of that, yes.
yeah, all that nice, exciting, flashy stuff. It's actually what I was just on a call with a brand this morning that wanted to ask us about both China and India. And what I want to know from them, the first questions I need to know from them, besides their fantastic brand and
Mm,
et cetera, but I need to know where their trademarks are registered. I
mm,
need to know the product retail and wholesale price, and I need to know the HS code for each of the products that they're planning on selling in India and China, so I can understand the regulatory environment, the tariffs, and what channels it's possible and in what time frame to launch in those markets. So
mm.
some very, I guess technical, regulatory, legal questions are the first questions that need to be answered. When you're considering an overseas market.
Interesting. And you mentioned your title has changed from China CEO to cover a greater part of the region. And I've
Yeah.
seen you've been posting a few things about India. So can you tell us about what's going on with your expansion into India?
Yeah, very, very exciting. So, in the last few years, there has been a push from governments of Australia and New Zealand, and I'd say the U.S. as well. We want to maintain our business and our relationship with China, and that we believe in the ongoing opportunity there for sure. But it's also important that brands have a diversification strategy in the Asia market. And with our experience already, my experience in the US market and in China, we want to go after the world's the next big thing. and we're really excited with the opportunity in India right now. It is from a GDP and income per family basis. India right now is somewhere where China was about 2008, 2009, where the huge commercial or the commercialization of the Chinese customer happened, where they started to really become a global buying, consumer buying mega house, mega market,
That growing middle class, right? It
that
was,
growing middle
yeah.
class. We see that now. It's probably wrong to use too broad of a brush to compare India and China, but there's some comparisons, or even opposite side of the fences that cannot be dismissed and cannot be overlooked.
Mm.
One is what you've mentioned. Probably number one is that rising middle class in India. That's one. The second is the rise of e-commerce in India. And the other one is just the overall, if you look at the world's growth trajectory, you're looking at 70% of the world's projected GDP growth in 2024 is coming from three markets: the US, China, and India.
Hmm.
So they're too big to ignore. And we're very excited by the India opportunity, their embrace of, I guess you would call it Western technology. Um, Meta and Alphabet, they're the world's biggest users of every major software within those platforms and those companies. They speak our digital language. What's also interesting about India, this is the counter China argument, is that there's 380 Chinese apps that are banned in India. So
Mm.
everything WeChat, TikTok, or which is Douyin, etc., and TikTok, all banned in India because they want to control their market. And the same side, the other side of that is all of the Western apps are banned in China.
Vice
So you
versa.
have these two very distinct ecosystems. But
Mm.
there are also these amazing synergies between the markets. So right now, what we're actually able to do is we have portfolio brands in China. We have about 20 brands that we're selling in China. We've got five of those have raised their hand and wanted to look at the Indian market. So we're able to use our China office to help support our India partners in the launch of these products. So there are clear synergies between
So
India and China. And
you're helping Australian companies move into China, move into India. Any other countries in the region that you're looking at, or are you seeing countries, within Southeast Asia looking to expand into China as well and coming to you for that advice?
There's definitely interest from Indian companies to get into China and also from Chinese companies to get into India. While there's this aversion between the two companies in visiting the major e-commerce platforms in India, Amazon, Flipkart, GeoMart, a very big platform from Reliance Retail that we're working directly with. A large part of the cross-border e-commerce happening on those platforms is actually from Chinese brands and Chinese manufactured products,
Mm.
particularly in areas where India manufacturing is maybe not as advanced. So
Mm.
things like small household electronics and things like that. So there's this aversion, but then this amazing partnership between the two countries as well.
Because you
A
would
lot
see
of
just by the news and the politics, you would think business has completely stopped, but that's not the case. The case is
no, and
people are looking to do commerce, to do commerce and trade and explore new markets, and I think that's exactly what you can help with. Absolutely. Um,
absolutely.
what is the RooLife Group marketplace? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the RooLife Group Marketplace is it's actually a collection of platforms which we operate on in various markets. So, for example, we have uh, it's on the WeChat app, but the WeChat app is unique in that within the WeChat app, there's many apps that work within that ecosystem. And one of them is called Yojan, which is a cross-border and general trade selling app within the WeChat app. We have a RooLife mall within there, so we can launch multi-category, multi-brands onto one platform in WeChat, and that app can connect to any of the major platforms within China to sell our product. In fact, the promotion which I told you about earlier, that happened yesterday, that all happened on RooLife's the WeChat Youjian app. Then we have in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong number one e-commerce is Hong Kong TV Mall. RooLife also
Hmm.
has a shop there. So it's a relatively quick and easy way in the first instance for brands to jump on with us, launch their
Hmm.
products directly to consumer and get some feeling for the market, maybe without setting up their whole own flagship store, e-commerce website. So it's a very
Yeah, and
fast way to penetrate
I think the
markets.
technology has advanced a lot. You see, when I was living in Southeast Asia, you see things like Grab, and they have their whole ecosystem of apps from shopping to, delivery of
Yeah.
food to taxis, whatever. And I think the same thing goes with the apps in China, WeChat. Uber's starting to do a little bit of that. I think you start to see, obviously Uber Eats and all and the deliveries and whatnot. But I think yeah, it's just navigating all the different technologies around the world, and that adds a layer of complexity as well. I do have an interest in the AI space. That's something that I'm always thinking about, marketing and AI and how those things intersect. So, have
Yeah.
you been investigating AI? Have you been using it? Is it helping your company to communicate with other countries? What's the biggest use cases for you that you've seen?
Well, I'll start just on a very personal level that AI has just improved my efficiency and effectiveness tremendously, especially working with multi languages and contracts and things like that. So one thing just in for me, I mean, obviously we're dealing with brands and we're dealing with contracts for different countries and possibly even in different languages, especially with China. Um, Getting a dual language contract used to be a very cumbersome and expensive exercise actually to do right. I think the main thing was just the time and then the possibility for error. So if you have a dual language contract, which is never a good idea anyways, but if you have to, you
Because
know,
there's
you're changing.
there's like literal translation of words, which sometimes doesn't make any
And
sense.
then, as you're going through all the revisions, you make one change in the Chinese, but it doesn't get changed in the English, and you can end up with so many errors. GPT can really take that away and smooth that process out so quickly. But even though I do speak Chinese and I do read Chinese, I'm not very fluent in reading Chinese, especially. But my ability to quickly translate documents or things I see or understand or just ask, how does this contract look? And get an answer back in seconds. It has changed my world, particularly in the contract and writing area and in multiple languages. It's been a game changer for me personally. Then on the China side, I've also seen, although they don't officially have ChatGPT in China, they now have a lot of
Their own
AI
apps, yep.
functions. So again, we a lot of stuff we have to do is taking English content and translating into Chinese, for example. I've just noticed that without even setting anything up, the timeline for that has gone from things that would take 3 or 4 days are happening in minutes or hours as far as translating content, which is a huge part of the workload, especially of say the social media or the e-commerce team.
Mm.
Um,
Well,
Also, just another thing is I've noticed that my team's English written emails have been improving dramatically. And they say, oh, we put it in our China AI, and I'm like that email is just amazingly well written that you wrote to the brand. So on just an everyday practical level, we're seeing great impact in our daily working lives. Then on the back of the big platforms like Tmall, VIP, and JD that we work with on a daily basis. The analytics that AI is providing, the customer care functions, all now integrated into
mm,
these systems, has just grown leaps and bounds in the last couple of years, and it's making everything just so much more efficient and effective. Um,
wow.
but yeah, China's embracing it for sure in their own way.
That's yeah. I found that it definitely helps me with my day to day. I start to think AI first. What can it do to help me improve a current process? Well, we're running in close to the end of time. I'll basically, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you to give a little bit of advice to anybody who's maybe what's the first thing they need to think about when they're trying to expand into new markets, whether it's China or India. Like, what's your biggest learning lessons learned from all the lessons you've gone through?
Oh, yeah. Look, I would say that, and as I do on a daily basis, go out and find an expert, a trusted friend or expert that has been there. Um, um, this is going back to the dawn of civilization and humanities, almost tribal, is that we would learn from ancestors ways to do things. I still believe in some of those ancient wisdoms. So finding someone that has been down that path before that you know and trust, and get their advice on it for your particular brand and product. That would be my advice number one. And on a very practical level, again, this is more about FMCG. Is you have to look at your value proposition for your brand, product, or service. Like, do you have enough margin, and do you have a big enough value proposition that it's going to work on a global basis? Even if it works locally, does that value chain, is there enough margin, and do you have enough
Mm,
efficiencies to be able to extend that? Because extending it, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, geographically is going to take more time, more cost, and more effort.
mm.
So do you have that margin and that room and the resources to be able to expand? Ask yourself that question. Don't get carried away. Here's one bit of advice I would have. This is a bit harsh, but if I see a presentation of someone that is going into the China or India market and is starts off with the 1.5 billion, and we're going to get the 1% and then a calculation. I've done it myself, I'll confess. Um, that kind of throws me off right there. Don't look at that big pie and just think it's easy, because a lot of people are doing the same thing. You need to look at how you can connect with that first person, and how that value chain is actually going to have to work, and what is your value proposition, and what is the formula to just reach a few people and then expand from there. So in other words, start from the bottom up, not the top down. Don't get carried away with that big huge number.
The exuberance of it all. Yes.
Yes, you can get lost in the China dream.
Yeah, China doesn't, you don't change China. China will probably change you, which sounds like it's had a big impact to you for sure.
You just quoted the name of one of my favorite books, which is, have you heard? It's by on China, and which I highly highly recommend. It's called "To Change China" by Jonathan Spence. Is that what you were quoting, or
No, I've just heard the saying in the past. But yeah,
yeah,
maybe. I mean,
it
this is
might
probably
be where
from very
it might be?
early high school time, if it was around that time.
I'm pretty sure I have it right up here on my
Is it
bookshelf. Although,
at least 20 years old? Then maybe I have
but
quoted it
let
without
me.
realizing.
To Change China by Jonathan Spence. It's written like in the 80s, but I highly recommend it. And each chapter is about missionaries, military people, traders who came to
I,
China and thought they might change China. But it's a little bit of a play on words. It's like to change China, but really
yeah.
what it's saying is you don't change China, China changes you.
I think I may have read that back in the back in the 90s
There
actually.
you
I
go.
think that's
Well,
probably it's amazing how those things come back to you. But
yep. Well said.
well, thank you very much. Really appreciate all the time you've given today and to share some of the learnings. I think if anybody's interested in reaching out to learn more about getting into markets like India and China, or understanding what it takes to do that, Jonathan Cox at RooLife Group is the person to contact. So thank you, Jonathan. I
Well, it's a
appreciate
pleasure to talk to you
the
today,
conversation.
Sean. Thank you
And
so much.
hope to see you. Maybe we'll see each other on a plane somewhere. Who knows? On the
There
way to
you go.
China
I'm sure we will.
or India. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you
All
so
right. Take
much.
care.
Thanks. Have a
Cheers.
great your day.